Listening to, watching, and even covering stories that involve children, it's hard for me. They're so innocent, so trusting and fragile. They haven't really had the chance to live life yet. So hearing about a child being harmed, being taken from their family is always tough. But I also believe we have a responsibility to honor their lives, to speak their names, to tell their stories, not just as true crime cases, but as reminders that these were real children with real dreams and real futures. Keeping their stories alive helps ensure they're never forgotten, and it shines a light on the people and systems that failed to protect them. So maybe, just maybe, history doesn't keep repeating itself. I'm almost embarrassed to admit this, but until recently, I had never heard of the Freeway Phantom. As someone raised and still living in the DMV, it stopped me in my tracks to learn that 6 young black girls were abducted and murdered between 1971 and 1972, right here in Washington, D.C. And yet, I had never been taught their names, their stories, or how their killer was never caught. Their names were Carol Denise Spinks, Darlenia Denise Johnson, Brenda Faye Crockett, Nenomoshia Yates, Brenda Denise Woodard, and Diane Denise Williams. They were daughters, sisters, and friends taken far too soon. And for more than 50 years, their families have waited for justice. This episode is about remembering them, not just as victims of still unsolved string of murders, but as young girls whose lives mattered. Carol Denise Spinks was just 13 years old, an identical twin and one of 8 children. Her family lovingly called her Bebe. She lived with her mom in Congress Heights and was a shy 7th grader at Johnson Junior High School. Carol loved jumping double dutch, playing jacks with her sisters, and showing off her hula hooping skills on the sidewalk. She was quiet, shy, and deeply loved. On April 25, 1971, a Sunday, her older sister Valerie gave her $5 and asked her to walk to the 7-Eleven, just a half a mile away, to grab some TV dinners and soda. It seemed simple enough, but they were breaking a rule. The mother had warned them not to leave the house while she was visiting family in Brentwood. Still, Carol slipped out the door and headed to the store on Willow Road. While walking, her mother, by coincidence, saw her. She was furious. She told Carol to go straight home after getting the groceries and warned her she was going to get a whipping when she returned. But Carol never made it home. 3 hours passed. Her family began to worry. Her mother called the police and filed a missing persons report, and her siblings and neighbors took to the streets. They retracted her steps, stopping at the 7-Eleven. The cashier remembered her. Carol had come in, bought everything she needed, and left. But somewhere between that short walk from the store to her front door, Carol vanished. 6 days later, on May 1st, 1971, the search for Carol came to a heartbreaking end. Her body was discovered on an embankment beside the northbound lanes of I-295, about 1,500 feet south of Suitland Parkway. It was a brutal scene. Carol, barely 5 foot tall and just 100 pounds, had been sexually assaulted and strangled. She suffered deep cuts to her face, neck, and chest, and hands. Her nose was bloodied, and her shoes were missing. Green synthetic fibers clung to her clothing, clues that would later appear in other cases. She was still wearing the same blue gym shorts, red sweater, and brown socks she had on when she left home nearly a week earlier. But what disturbed investigators even more was what they found during her autopsy: citrus fruit in her stomach. This detail led detectives to believe that her killer had kept her alive for several days, feeding her before taking her life. It was a cruel, calculated act. And sadly, it was only the beginning. Darlenia Denise Johnson was just 16, outgoing, vibrant, and well-known in her neighborhood. Born and raised in D.C., she lived in Congress Heights, on the very same street where Carol Spinks was last seen. And like Carol, Darlenia attended Johnson Junior High, though the two didn't know each other. Their lives and ultimately their tragedies were connected. It was July 1971, and Darlenia was enjoying her summer. She had a part-time job at the Oxen Run Recreation Center and spent her days surrounded by friends and neighborhood kids. On the morning of July 8th, she left home to help with a sleepover at the rec center for younger children. It was a small act of kindness, just a normal part of her summer routine. But Darlenia never showed up. Because she was expected to spend the night at the center, her absence wasn't noticed right away. It wasn't until her parents called to check in that they learned that the rec center staff hadn't seen her at all. That's when panic set in. Witnesses later told police they saw Darlenia getting into a black car driven by a black male. Investigators followed the lead, but like so many tips in this case, it went nowhere. 11 days later, on July 20th, police received an anonymous call, one that would lead them to another grim discovery. Darlenia's body was found near I-295, just 15 feet from where Carol Spinks had been left. Darlenia's body was so badly decomposed from the summer heat that the medical examiner was forced to remove her fingers in order to identify her. Remember, this was years before DNA testing would become standard. Despite the condition of her remains, authorities believe that Darlenia, like Carol, had been strangled. Two girls, same age range, same neighborhood, same stretch of highway, same fate, and still no suspect. The pattern was beginning to form, even if no one wanted to believe it yet. Brenda Faye Crockett was just 10 years old, the youngest of the known victims. She lived in Northwest Washington, D.C., near Cardozo High School, and was surrounded by a close-knit group of friends. Her little sister Bertha, just 7 at the time, remembered Brenda's tiny dimple on her chin and how much she loved going to church. On July 27, 1971, Brenda's mother sent her on a quick errand to the Safeway, just 5 blocks from their home, to pick up dog food. It was a simple trip, one she'd made before. But when an hour passed and Brenda hadn't returned, her mother knew something was wrong. She rushed out into the streets, searching for her daughter. Then 3 hours after Brenda disappeared, the phone rang. Her little sister Bertha picked up. It was Brenda. She was crying. According to Bertha, and later police records, Brenda sounded scared. She said, "Mama is going looking for you," Bertha told her, trying to reassure her big sister. Brenda, through her tears, said that a white man had picked her up, but not to worry. He was going to send her home in a cab. And then she hung up. 25 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, Brenda's stepfather answered. "I'll come get you," he quickly said. "Just tell me where you are." But Brenda's tone had changed. She was calm now, almost too calm. She said she was in Virginia, and then she asked something that still haunts her family to this day. "Did my mother see me?" Her stepfather replied gently, "If your mother had seen you, she would have gotten you." He urged Brenda to put the man on the phone. In the background, heavy footsteps could be heard approaching. And then, just before the line went dead, Brenda said one final thing. "I'll see you." She hung up, and she was never heard from again. 8 hours after Brenda's last call, at 5:50 a.m., a hitchhiker made a grim discovery along Route 50 in Cheverly, just across the D.C. line in Maryland. It was Brenda. She was fully clothed. A scarf had been tied tightly around her neck and knotted, a chilling signature. She had been raped and strangled. Investigators quickly began to question the strange phone calls her family had received. They now believed the calls were staged, meant to confuse both the family and law enforcement. Police theorized that someone may have witnessed Brenda's abduction, and the killer, realizing this, forced her to make the calls as a distraction, to throw everyone off his trail. No one knows if it was really a white man who picked her up, or if she had ever been in Virginia at all. The calls couldn't be traced, and just like Carol and Darlenia before her, Brenda's life was stolen, and her killer was still out there. Nenomoshia Yates, affectionately known as Nene, was a shy and quiet 12-year-old sixth grader at Kelly Miller Junior High School. She lived in Northeast Washington, D.C. with her father and stepmother, and by all accounts was a sweet, obedient child who kept to herself. On October 1st, 1971, Nene's father asked her to run a quick errand to the Safeway, just a block from their home. Now remember, this was the early 70s. It wasn't uncommon for kids to be sent to the corner store for a few groceries. And with Nene's stepmother having just given birth, her father needed to stay at the hospital. So he asked Nene to pick up a few simple things: sugar, flour, and paper plates. She went. She finished the shopping, but she never came home. When Nene's father returned from the hospital, he called family looking for her, then went straight to the Safeway. He asked the store employee if they'd seen her. They had. Nene had come in, bought everything she was sent for, and then left. But when her father walked outside, what he saw stopped him cold. All the groceries he had sent her to get were scattered on the ground just outside the store, as if she had vanished right there on the sidewalk. Whatever happened to Nene, it happened fast, and it happened close. Less than 3 hours after Nene left home, her body was discovered. A 16-year-old boy found her along Pennsylvania Avenue in Prince George's County. Her body was still warm. Nene had been raped and strangled with such force that her esophagus was broken. She was fully clothed, but her shoes were missing, just like the others. And once again, the same green synthetic fibers were found on her clothing. A witness later claimed to have seen Nene get into a blue Volkswagen with Maryland tags. Police took the lead seriously, seizing and searching more than 25 blue Volkswagens. But like many times before, the lead went nowhere. The pattern was undeniable. The fear was growing, and DC was running out of time. 4 young Black girls, all snatched while doing something ordinary, running errands, walking to the store, helping their families, all found murdered, all missing their shoes. Some carrying traces of the same green synthetic fibers. It was after the discovery of Nene's body that the media began pressing the police. Were these cases connected? Up until now, officials have been cautious, but with the similarities stacking up, the public wanted answers. The pressure was mounting, and this is when the name Freeway Phantom first began to circulate. All of the girls had been abducted from their neighborhoods, and all of their bodies had been found dumped along the sides of major roads or highways. It was as if the killer was using the freeway as his personal dumping ground. Silent, quick, in and out before anyone noticed. The pattern was no longer just a speculation. It was undeniable. DC had a serial killer. Brenda Denise Woodard was 18 years old, the eldest of the known victims. Originally from Baltimore, Brenda was living in DC and taking night classes at Cardozo High School. She was outgoing, full of personality, and loved spending time with her friends, often catching a bite at local spots. On that night of November 15, 1971, Brenda did just that. Her father dropped her off at night school, and after class, Brenda left with a male classmate. And the two stopped at Ben's Chili Bowl for dinner. Afterward, they boarded a bus headed towards Northeast DC. At some point, Brenda got off to catch a second bus that would take her home to Maryland Avenue. But she never made it. Another young woman, another ordinary night, another mystery. And this time, the killer would leave behind something even more disturbing than before. 6 hours after Brenda Denise Woodard was last seen, in the early morning hours of November 16, 1971, a police officer made a grim discovery. Brenda's body was found on the grass near an access ramp to Route 202 from the BW Parkway. She had been raped, strangled, and stabbed multiple times. Brenda was the first victim to be stabbed, and she fought back. Defensive wounds were found on her hands, proof that she tried to protect herself in her final moments. Unlike the previous victims, Brenda was still wearing her black shoes. Her burgundy crushed velvet coat had been carefully draped over her body, and her turtleneck sweater was found inside out, suggesting that the killer redressed her after attacking her. During the investigation, police discovered 2 strands of hair on her clothing, one from an African American individual and one from someone of Caucasian descent. But remember, this was 1971. There was no DNA testing, no way to trace the hairs. So once again, the evidence went cold, and the killer remained just out of reach. But what truly set this case apart was what the killer left behind. In the pocket of Brenda's coat was a handwritten note. It was written on a page torn from the notebook Brenda was carrying. When the handwriting was examined, it was confirmed to be Brenda's. The working theory? She had been forced to write it. The note read, "This is a tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me, if you can. Signed, the Freeway Phantom." This was no longer just a string of murders. The killer was speaking, taunting, owning what he'd done, and now he had a name. One that would haunt the district for decades to come. Diane Denise Williams was 17, bright, beautiful, and full of ambition. She dreamed of becoming a singer, a model, maybe even an actress one day. Outgoing and full of promise, Diane was the youngest girl in a large, close-knit family from Southeast DC. She was a senior at Ballou High School, and on the evening of September 5th, 1972, she did something simple and kind. She cooked dinner for her family. Afterward, she got ready to visit her boyfriend James, taking the bus to his house. Her parents had only one rule: be home by 10 p.m. James walked Diane to the bus stop and waited with her. The stop was just minutes from the very same area where Carol Spinks and Darlenia Johnson had vanished more than a year earlier. Diane's bus didn't arrive until 11:20 p.m., over an hour past her curfew, but she boarded the bus and waved goodbye. She never made it home, and by the next morning, her family's worst fears would come true. Just a few hours after Diane boarded that bus, her body was found. She had been left on the side of I-295, just south of the district line, discarded like so many of the others. She had been strangled. Diane was still wearing her white tennis shoes, her name written carefully on the heel, and $1.26 was tucked into the hip pocket of her jeans. Unlike the previous victims, medical examiners found no signs of sexual assault, but they did find semen on her clothing. Her boyfriend James was clear. They hadn't been intimate that night. The semen wasn't his. It was another detail that left more questions than answers. Another hopeful life cut short. And with Diane's death, the known murders attributed to the Freeway Phantom came to an abrupt and unexplained end. But the pain, the fear, and the haunting absence of justice never did. Thousands of phone calls poured into police tip lines. The community was desperate for answers. So were investigators. At first, nearly 24 detectives were assigned to the hunt. And by the time Brenda Denise Woodard was murdered, even the FBI had joined the investigation. In 1974, the FBI created a task force to investigate the murders, and 100 detectives and federal agents from the DMV had been assigned. But then came Watergate. As the political scandal unraveled just a few miles away, the FBI resources were pulled in a different direction. Manpower shifted, priorities changed, and slowly the Freeway Phantom case began to fade from the headlines. The tips led nowhere. The leads went cold. Years passed. The case grew quiet, but not for everyone. Detective Romaine Jenkins, the first female homicide detective in Washington, D.C., and one of only a few black women in the department at the time, would later pick up the case, determined not to let these girls be forgotten. Though she wasn't assigned to the case when the murders happened, years later, she became one of the few detectives who took a renewed interest in the investigation. Jenkins dove into the dusty files, retracted evidence, reviewed old interviews, and became a vocal advocate for the victims. One of the strongest suspects was Robert Askins, a computer technician and former patient at St. Elizabeth's. In 1938, he was convicted of poisoning a woman, but later released on a technicality. Decades later, during a separate investigation, police searched his home and found disturbing items: women's scarves, photos of girls, and a copy of a court opinion containing the word tantamount, the same rare word used in the killer's note. Still, the forensic evidence didn't match. The green fibers and hair found on the victims weren't his. Askins was never charged in the Freeway Phantom case, but was later convicted in an unrelated kidnapping and died in prison in 2010. Another lead investigators chased was the Green Vega Gang, a local carjacking ring known for abducting women in green Chevy Vegas. One member even claimed to know who the Phantom was. But when Jenkins went looking for their interview files, they had mysteriously vanished. The FBI didn't have copies either. It was one of the most promising leads, and it disappeared without a trace. Jenkins later voiced her frustration, not just with the lost evidence, but with how the victims had been treated. They were black. They were from working class families. They didn't matter to the people who were supposed to protect them. Her words still echo today. 6 young girls, 6 grieving families, and a case that remains unsolved more than 50 years later. Detective Romaine Jenkins retired from the Metropolitan Police Department in 1994, but the girls, their faces, their stories, their names never left her. Even in retirement, she carried them with her. She spoke about them, fought to keep their cases from being forgotten. She became, in many ways, their voice when no one else was speaking. And though she passed away, the memory of these 6 young black girls lived on through her, because Romaine Jenkins never let the world forget that they mattered. Though more than 50 years have passed, we must remember Carol Denise Spinks, Darlenia Denise Johnson, Brenda Faye Crockett, Nenomoshia Yates, Brenda Denise Woodard, and Diane Denise Williams. They were daughters, sisters, friends. They had dreams, and they were stolen. This case isn't just unsolved, it's unresolved, because justice delayed is not justice denied. It's justice unfinished. The Freeway Phantom still has no name, but the girls do, and their names deserve to be spoken, remembered, and honored, not just in podcasts or archives, but in action. This is a call to DC law enforcement, to federal agencies, to anyone who still holds power. Reopen the files. Re-examine the evidence. Give these families what they've waited decades for: truth. Because these girls mattered then, they matter now, and justice for them is long overdue. Thank you for watching today's episode.